Episode 31. Who's the boss? Elliot was silent as he drove Helen to the Starlight restaurant. It was too early to eat, so there weren't many customers in the restaurant yet, but it was still more crowded than the neighboring restaurants at that hour. The moment he saw the two of them walk through the door, the manager, Charlie Burns, ran over with a few of the servers to welcome them. They lined up and chimed in unison. "Welcome, boss!" "Huh?" Helen said, startled, thinking they were referring to her. Quickly, she waved her hands back and forth and told them, "You've got the wrong person. I'm not your boss." "No, you're not our boss, but Mr. Branders, who is standing beside you, is," Charlie said, extending his hand toward Elliot and flashing a smile. "Him?" Helen said incredulously, surprised by what she had just heard. She looked at Elliot, and then her gaze drifted to the manager's exuberant face, his smile fixed in place. Still reeling in disbelief, she asked, "You're saying he's your boss?" "Why, of course," replied the manager. "Oh my God," Helen exclaimed, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She looked at Elliot and asked, "So this restaurant is yours too?" Her original plan was to find a nice restaurant where they could have a quiet lunch, hoping that they wouldn't be recognized or disturbed by anyone. But who would have thought that the Starlight restaurant would also be one of Elliot's businesses? Did he really have control over Hillsdale's two best restaurants? "I thought this restaurant had potential, so I bought it," Elliot explained, scratching his head and offering her a lopsided grin. "Damn," Helen said softly, letting this information slowly sink in. She didn't know what to say. Charlie decided to break the silence and waved them in. "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Boss, come on in," he said jovially. Helen instantly turned red and retorted, "Excuse me, but I'm not Mrs. Boss." "I beg your pardon. It's just that Mr. Branders has never brought a lady with him to the restaurant before. You're the first," Charlie replied warmly. "Is that so?" Helen asked, sneaking a glance at Elliot, suddenly feeling a slight thrill course through her. Elliot coughed and instructed the manager, "Don't get the wrong idea. Helen is a friend. We just dropped in for a bite to eat." "Of course. Please sit anywhere you'd like. I'll have the kitchen prepare something extra special for you," the manager said, and turned toward the back of the restaurant, followed by one of the servers. Elliot could see him talking intently and gesturing wildly to the young girl, giving instructions as they were about to disappear into the kitchen. Elliot, not wanting a grand banquet, shouted after them, "Charlie, please don't go out of your way. We're just here as regular customers today and prefer something low-key. I want you to keep it simple, nothing over the top." Within seconds, Charlie was back by Elliot's side, wanting nothing more than to please his employer. Nodding his head rapidly, he apologized. "But of course, Mr. Branders, I understand exactly what you're wanting. Please, take a seat and I'll take care of everything." Now that Elliot's instructions were crystal clear, Charlie and the head server made sure to treat their boss and his guest as ordinary customers, avoiding any extra attention or frills. "Perfect," Elliot said to him, and led Helen to a quiet table in the corner. They sat down and, after choosing a few dishes for their lunch, started to chat while they waited. After a few minutes, Helen's expression abruptly darkened, and her eyes narrowed as she stared at the entrance to the restaurant. With a look of disgust, she muttered, "I can't believe this. Do you see who I see?" Elliot turned around in his chair and saw Carson Reed walking into the restaurant. "That pain in the ass must have followed my Ford here," he thought, sighing. "He's got a lot of nerve," Elliot softly muttered as he rubbed his chin, already formulating escape plans in his mind. Helen leaned her head close to his and whispered in his ear, "I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend again." "No problem," Elliot replied, nodding in agreement. Then, seeing a window of opportunity, he decided to seize the moment and ask, "Should we do something that couples typically do in situations like this?" "What's that?" Helen asked distractedly, her eyes still fixed on Carson. "Kiss me," he said, looking straight at her. Don't even think about it," Helen said, as she shook her head and rolled her eyes at him. Even though there was no question regarding her rejection, she decided to lean back in her chair to add more space between them. Who knew if Elliot might try to sneak in a kiss? While they were whispering to each other, trying to figure out how to survive their unwelcome visitor, Carson had already walked over and plopped himself down on a seat at their table. "Why, Carson, what are you doing here?" Helen said, and crossed her arms, glaring at him with unmistakable annoyance. "To be honest, Helen, I really hate seeing someone I like being made a fool of," he responded. Then, turning to face Elliot, he continued, "You see, this guy isn't to be trusted. He's nothing but a fraud who says whatever he needs to say to convince pretty girls that he's loaded. You know his car is probably a rental, and I expect everything else he has told you is nothing but a pack of lies." "Yes, a total pack of lies. There's no way this guy owns a car worth $500,000, Carson thought to himself. I mean, look at him. He's wearing ripped jeans, for Christ's sake. Wake up, Helen. "This is really none of your business, Carson. Why don't you just leave?" Helen suggested. She had zero interest in wasting another minute on him. "Come on, aren't we all friends here? You're not even going to invite me to join you for lunch?" he asked, looking innocently at Helen's irritated expression. Actually, Helen really couldn't think of a plausible reason to chase him away. He was just being annoying, and she wasn't in the mood. Then again, he was a friend of a friend, so she wondered if perhaps she should at least make an effort and not be a total bitch. While she was debating this in her head, the server began bringing their food to the table. Helen decided to keep her mouth shut and picked up her fork to eat. She just wanted this awkward lunch to be over as soon as possible. "I heard that this is one of your favorite restaurants, Helen. Do you eat here very often?" Carson asked casually to make conversation, his face fixed with his usual fake smile. "Actually, it is," Helen said, nodding her head at him. "Since it's your favorite, I'd love to make it yours," he declared. Straightening his tie, he raised his head high and announced, "I plan to invest in this restaurant." Then he snapped his fingers at the nearest server and said, "Excuse me, call the manager over, please. I'd like to speak to him about investing in this restaurant." "This restaurant?" The server wasn't sure how to respond and looked at Elliot. Seeing no reaction from his employer, he decided it was best to say nothing and trotted off to fetch Charlie. The manager arrived and, with a quick glance at Elliot, said to Carson, "Sir, I understand you're interested in becoming an investor here, but I'm sorry to inform you that our restaurant doesn't currently need financial backing." Carson took his wallet from his pocket, withdrew a bank card, and threw it onto the table. His voice rang out loudly as he offered, "Here's $5 million. I want 30% of the shares in the restaurant." He was risking everything to impress Helen, hoping to win her over. He also wanted to let Elliot know that he had some powerful cards in his hand as well. Elliot and Helen looked at each other and didn't say anything, unsure how to react to this comedy act they were witnessing. "As this is a business matter, I think it would be best for you to speak directly with our boss," Charlie said politely. He couldn't quite figure out the relationship between the man in front of him and his employer, so he thought it best to keep his tone as professional and neutral as possible. "Well, what are you waiting for? Go get him," Carson ordered, determined to get this deal through. Although he was about to invest everything he had in the restaurant for the love of Helen, he also considered it to be a smart investment that would yield much more than his current trading company. "Are you sure you want to see him?" Charlie inquired, and glanced at Elliot again, waiting for some indication, a sign for how to proceed. Yet Elliot remained expressionless and appeared completely indifferent to what was happening. "How many times do I have to ask?" Carson said. He was losing his patience, and his tone reflected it. "There's no need to ask again," Charlie replied. He turned and extended an arm toward Elliot as he announced, "This is the owner of Starlight Restaurant." The manager was relieved to finally hand over the reins to his employer and stepped back from the situation at hand. He had started to sweat from the stress of it all. "Excuse me? What did you say?" Carson said, inclining his head as though he hadn't heard clearly. "I said Mr. Branders owns this restaurant," Charlie repeated. "He's the boss around here." Episode 32. No More Mr. Nice Guy. Completely caught off guard by the news, Carson suddenly felt his legs turn to jelly and his vision start to fade. The next thing he knew, he was on the floor with his head whirling as he tried to focus on the faces hovering above him. He seemed to have passed out and lay practically paralyzed on the ground. He didn't know how long he had been there, but his face was stinging with pain, as though he'd been slapped a few times. "Christ, I was going to put $5 million on the line," Carson thought, as he tried to piece everything together. "That's all the money I've got. And for what? Helen doesn't give a damn about me." He was thinking more clearly now. What the hell was I thinking? And this guy's the owner? Shit! Throughout all of this, Elliot hadn't said a word, but his silence had had its effect. "Are you all right?" Charlie asked, as he rushed to help Carson up from the ground, a concerned expression on his face. Carson uttered, finding himself at a loss for words. His body was stiff, and considering how ridiculously he had behaved before, he felt very uncomfortable now. "You know, Mr. Branders is quite approachable. Why don't you talk to him about the possibility of buying shares?" Charlie suggested with a friendly smile. Now on his feet, Carson regained his sense of composure and, swallowing hard, turned and faced Elliot. Do I even dare to ask him this? He thought, doubting the intelligence of such a move. I treated him like shit before. He isn't going to want to talk to me, much less let me into the business. So, Carson, I hear you want to buy shares in my restaurant, Elliot said coldly, looking at him through narrowed eyes. Yes, I want to buy shares, Carson muttered as he clenched his teeth bitterly, furious at the position he had found himself in. Before he could finish, however, he was interrupted by Elliot, who said bluntly, Well, forget about it. First of all, our restaurant isn't in dire straits or in need of any investors to save it. And for the record, we don't deal with people like you. Why you? Carson struggled to get the words out. He was so angry that the corner of his mouth trembled, but he didn't know how to respond, knowing he was on the losing side of this conversation. Suddenly, Elliot was the one in the power position, while he felt like he was struggling to climb up a mountain. I think it's time that you leave now, Elliot said, as he leaned his body against the back of his chair. And in the future, I recommend you stay away from Helen. Otherwise, he warned menacingly, his voice trailing off. For dramatic effect, Elliot threw the cup in his hand onto the ground. The resounding crash and sound of glass flying caused Carson to shrink back with a start as his chest seized with anxiety. He raised his head slowly and glanced at Elliot with wide eyes, recognizing it was time to leave. His shoulders drooping, he turned around and left with his bank card in hand, defeat marking every step. Carson having finally gone, the tense atmosphere changed, and everyone gradually relaxed. Thank you, Helen said to Elliot, her eyes dancing as she revealed a small smile. Well, after all that, I imagine Carson won't be bothering me anymore. Hopefully he's smart enough to stay away and doesn't force me to take action, Elliot said, although he wasn't overly concerned about it, nor had he given it a second thought. Well, I think I'm ready to get out of here. Let's go. Helen pushed her plate away and looked over to where Charlie was standing. I'll pay. How much is it? She asked the manager. How much is it? Charlie repeated, and turned his head to give Elliot an inquiring look. In his eyes, if the boss brought a woman to his restaurant for dinner, it was covered by him, and not the other way around. But that wasn't his call to make, so he patiently waited for a response. Then he checked himself. Hadn't Elliot asked that they be treated as regular customers? Charlie began to sweat again. He hated when he was in doubt. Do you really need an answer from me? You don't actually expect her to pay the bill, do you? Elliot said, glaring at Charlie. Why, of course not, Charlie replied quickly, letting out a nervous laugh. Having such an atypical employer really threw him for a loop, and he knew he had to stay on his toes with this one. Charlie was so skittish in front of Elliot that Helen couldn't help but laugh. Just then, another server appeared at their table with dessert and announced, We thought you might like to try the chef's latest sweet creation, Lover's Delight. Nice, Elliot responded, licking his lips. He smiled and said to Helen, There's always room for dessert. Let's share it, and then we'll go. Lover's Delight? Are you serious? You eat it. I'm out of here, Helen said, throwing a look of disgust at the plate. She pushed back her chair, stood up, and grabbed her jacket. What the hell? Elliot wondered. It's a plate for couples to share, so what? Some people are so damn sensitive, he thought, as he saw her heading for the door. I guess we'll have to try it another time, Elliot said to the server, and got up from his chair. Go on and enjoy it. It would be a shame to let it go to waste, he instructed Charlie and the server, before running to catch up to Helen. The two left the restaurant and returned to Quinn's traffic school for more driving practice. Their instructor was a young man in his 30s named Sam Quinn. He was known for being really strict with the male students and overly friendly with the female students. In particular, Sam paid special attention to Helen and gave her extra driving hours to practice. It wasn't long before Elliot got annoyed by this. He had also gotten tired of watching Sam look at Helen like a wolf about to devour a lamb, his eyes wandering all over her body. His shameless attraction was so obvious, it was pathetic, but he seemed harmless enough. Sleazy as hell, but harmless. So at first, it wasn't a problem. However, over time, Sam had become bolder and bolder, until one day, when Helen wasn't paying attention, he reached out his hand to cop a feel. Elliot happened to be right there, and smacked Sam's hand away, yelling, Hey, hands off! You do realize she's one of your students, don't you? Mind your own business, Sam replied, pulling his hand free. Don't touch me again. Even though he'd been caught in the act, he didn't give a damn. Not only that, but he was actually threatening Elliot. His anger ignited, Elliot reacted instantly and swung his fist, which landed squarely in his instructor's face. "No more. This has gone on long enough," he said, his voice trembling. He had stood by and watched this dirtbag lurking around the girls in class, eyeing them up, but he hadn't done a damn thing. Enough was enough. Elliot had reached his limit and wasn't just angry. He was pissed off. "You think you can hit me, you," Sam began to say. But before he could finish his sentence, Elliot's fist connected with his face once again, and he screamed out in pain. "I'm not finished with you yet," Elliot said through clenched teeth, as he rushed forward, throwing a few more wild punches at him. Adrenaline surged through him, and he couldn't stop himself. Soon, Sam's piercing screams could be heard as Elliot continued to beat him to a pulp. He bared his teeth and grunted out fiercely between breaths. "My uncle's a principal. He's going to find out about this. He'll be sorry." By now, many students had gathered around to see what the commotion was all about. Holy shit, they thought, as their eyes took in the bloody scene. They had never seen this kind of altercation between a student and an instructor, and definitely not one this brutal. But when they saw who was being thrashed, the students felt relieved and satisfied to see Sam on the receiving end for once. The female students were especially gratified, having endured his constant advances and harassment throughout the course. It had been hard to talk about, with Sam being a figure of authority and related to the school principal, and often it seemed easier to simply remain silent. Get your driver's license and getting out was the general thought. Helen was stunned. She couldn't believe that Elliot had pummeled and pounded the instructor because of her. She had had tons of guys treat her to dinners, send her flowers, and buy her presents, but Elliot was the first guy to literally fight for her. While it had been hard to watch the violence that just ensued, she had to admit she was slightly moved by it too. The news of the fight soon spread like wildfire throughout the driving school. Principal Peter Quinn rushed over as soon as he heard and shouted, "Stop this right now!" Emerging from his blinding rage, Elliot paused then and saw that Sam was pretty battered. He knew he had to stop. Wincing in pain, Sam crawled over to his uncle and threw himself into his arms, crying out as he gulped for air. "Uncle Pete, he attacked me. You can't let him get away with this." "Oh my God, Sam, what's going on here?" Peter asked him with alarm, as his eyes ran over his nephew's pulverized and swollen face. Episode 33. Reckless Driving. "It was him! He attacked me!" Sam shouted, pointing a shaky finger at Elliot, his eyes filled with humiliation. "You," Peter said, looking at his nephew. "Get out of my face, now!" His eyes blazing, he then turned to stare coldly at Elliot. With a ferocious look, he said, "How dare you lay a hand on my nephew, you pathetic punk? You really do have a death wish, don't you? Your nephew is the pathetic one, strutting around here touching girls in broad daylight. I'm just giving him a taste of his own medicine," Elliot revealed, defending himself. "Bullshit!" Peter roared. Pointing his finger at the tip of Elliot's nose, he ordered, "Apologize to my nephew right now." "Me apologize? That's not going to happen," he replied. "Apologize or you're out. Do you hear me? No apology, no license," the principal said, crossing his arms and looking defiant. "Keep it. There are plenty of other schools in town that I'd rather go to anyway," Elliot responded. Then he went over to Helen, and the two of them turned and began to walk away. Hillsdale was full of driving schools that he could easily register with, and he was disgusted by the behavior of the instructors at Quinn's. If he'd known what it was like before, he would never have signed up there. "Do you really think you can just walk away?" Peter threatened with a hoarse voice. "This doesn't end here, you know. Leave if you want, but your family and friends will hear about this." A hushed murmur spread through the crowd. Peter's reputation, as well as his family's, was well known for its aggressive and sometimes illegal way of dealing with things. The students understood that this could go very wrong if Elliot wasn't careful. Hoping to avoid a major blow-up, Elliot's original plan was to let it go and just drop the matter. However, when he heard Peter's direct threat, his eyes hardened. He stopped walking and turned around to face the principal. "Are you threatening me?" he asked. "So what if I am?" Peter countered, eager for a fight. He straightened up and stuck his chest out, evidently unafraid to challenge Elliot, whom he saw as nothing but an insignificant, cocky kid. "You wouldn't want to see your precious driving school disappear from Hillsdale, would you?" Elliot asked through clenched teeth, his eyes flashing. If there was something that he really hated, it was someone threatening to harm his loved ones. And here, standing in front of him, was one doing just that. Hearing this, Peter began to laugh hysterically. He shouted, "You've got to be joking. Make my school disappear from Hillsdale? Just who do you think you are? A magician? Elliot was done wasting his time on this crap. He whipped out his phone and searched for his assistant Michelle's number. When she answered, he instructed her, "Within 3 days, I want you to open a new driving school directly in front of Quinn's traffic school. Open enrollment immediately, and whatever Quinn's is offering in terms of tuition and timelines, offer something better." After he hung up the phone, he began thinking about what he had just done. It had never entered his mind to go into the driving school industry before, but now seemed the right time to try it out and bring Peter's world of plastic traffic cones to a blazing end. The sound of loud laughter rang out as Peter once again snickered uncontrollably and sneered. "You really are something, you know that? So your plan is to open a new driving school and make mine disappear, eh? Do you know how absurd that sounds?" Even the students standing around them thought he was joking. He was a student like them, and from his appearance, he barely looked like he could afford to pay for the course, not to mention an entire school. Plus, Quinn's had been around for decades, opening as one of the first traffic schools in Hillsdale. It would be difficult to erase their name from the area. 3 days, Elliot said, and held up 3 fingers. Feeling full of confidence now, he added, "Remember that in 3 days, you're going to regret everything you said today." "Fine, but if you haven't ruined my school in 3 days, you'll be the one regretting your words," Peter roared in response. "I guess we'll see then." 3 days, Elliot shouted back. He grabbed Helen's arm, and they walked away quickly with all eyes glued to their backs as they left Quinn's without a backward glance. Once the school was no longer in sight, Helen couldn't wait to say something. "Thanks for helping me out back there." When she thought about how Elliot had stood up to Peter, the school principal, she couldn't help but feel touched. "You're my friend and you were in trouble. It was the right thing to do," Elliot said matter-of-factly, the anger inside him subsiding. A gentle smile appeared on his face as they walked. "Are you seriously going to start a driving school and shut Quinn's down?" Helen asked him. "Of course," he replied. "Do you think it's really worth the effort, though?" she said uncertainly, her eyebrows furrowed. "I can't let those jerks get away with their bullshit, Helen." Elliot replied seriously, still disturbed when he thought of how she had been treated. Then, wanting to lighten the mood, he said, "Besides, starting a driving school will be a new challenge for me. I could create a whole new market." "I really wish I knew what was going on in that mind of yours," Helen said, and shook her head with a wry smile. Instead of understanding him better over time, he was becoming more and more an enigma to her. Although Elliot appeared to be your ordinary boy next door, he was actually a very meticulous and mysterious person. When he did something, he did it in an unexpected way, making it hard for people to understand how his mind worked and respond. "I'll drop you off first," Elliot said, ignoring her comment. After he had left Helen at her house, he drove back to his place. On his way home, he received a call from Jack Johnson asking him to go to the Global International Club that evening. Since he had nothing else planned, he agreed. There's no harm in getting to know Jack better, Elliot thought. He's a great contact to have, especially considering all of my new business ventures. When he got home, he found Michelle alone and talking on the phone, arranging the details for his new driving school. When she saw Elliot, she hung up and asked him in confusion, "Now, why exactly do you suddenly want to start a driving school?" "Oh, you know, the driving schools in this town are terrible. Take Quinn's, for example. Its teachers don't know a thing about driving, and the school itself is in desperate need of a facelift," Elliot answered casually, his eyes twinkling at her. Although he was joking with her, he knew that his assistant was simply asking with his best interests in mind. "There are many ways to ruin someone's business if that's what you're after. Is it really necessary to start a driving school?" she said, frowning. She really couldn't understand him sometimes. "I believe that a driving school can be an excellent moneymaker. It's a good investment. It's that simple," he said. "But there are already plenty of driving schools in Hillsdale. The market is saturated as it is," she replied, trying to explain. "Why are you making such a big deal about this?" Elliot asked, getting impatient. He rolled his eyes at Michelle and said, "Don't you get it? We now officially belong to the Club of Troublemakers. Our new goals are to first, drive away competitors by offering everyone else free incentives. Then we monopolize the market with our business savvy. And finally, we create new rules to become the leaders of this whole insane game." "Right," she replied curtly. She looked away and became despondent as she thought about Elliot. She could see him becoming more and more like his grandfather in the way he spoke, and through the manipulative attitude that was increasingly more apparent. "Don't put on such a serious face," Elliot said. I realized he might have been a bit dark with his humor. He changed to a gentler tone and said, "By the way, I'm going to the Global Club tonight. Do you want to come? I think I'll pass, she replied. All right then, he said, not wanting to force the issue. Elliot changed his clothes and was walking toward the door to leave when Michelle called him. Elliot. She took out a card from her pocket and handed it to him. Take this. It might be useful. Are you inviting me to your room? Elliot quipped. He took the card and quickly realized that it wasn't a hotel room card, but a black card for the Global Club. Suddenly he heard a cough. It came from Michelle, whose face was pink with embarrassment as she explained. This is a Global Club black card. It was given to me by your grandfather many years ago. I recommend you don't lose it. These things don't grow on trees. Episode 34. Better than gold. Is that so? Elliot said, staring at the black card in his hand that had once belonged to his grandfather. The card was made of fine obsidian. It had the Global Club emblem on the front and a picture of a gold feather on the back. This was definitely no ordinary card. He could only guess what doors it might open. After staring at the black card for a while, Elliot raised his head and looked at Michelle. See if you can get the driving school sorted out tonight. I'm heading out. Elliot took a taxi to the Global International Club, the most exclusive club in Hillsdale. Only the richest of the rich were allowed entry. The club itself was shaped like an enormous blue pearl, nestled between two tall buildings. It was purposely designed to exude grandeur and opulence. As he entered the club's hall, Elliot saw that the ceiling was made of blue glass, which gave the effect of a dazzling star-filled night sky. While admiring the elegant details, several staff members came to greet him. This was indeed a high-class place, and the employees there were no exception. Compared to the staff in lower-end establishments, these were worlds apart in terms of appearance and performance. The club's employees were all attractive, tall, and dressed impeccably in tailored clothes. Obviously, the standards were much higher here, as everyone was seriously dressed to impress. One of them, a slim and beautiful woman, glided over to Elliot and said, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid only members are allowed. From her name tag, he knew her name was Alexa. He also saw that she was looking at him with a gaze of absolute contempt. Why would you think I'm not a member? Elliot asked. He'd already decided that he didn't like her, even if she was gorgeous. Our membership program requires a generous entry fee and an annual donation to the club, she explained, the corners of her mouth curling up saucily. Are you telling me that you are a member? I am, Elliot replied coolly. Very well then. Can you please show me your gold card? Alexa requested, and extended her hand. The gold card served as a member's identification in the club. Only those worth over 100 million could qualify for one. Alexa looked at the young man with a knowing look. She had dealt with his kind before. He obviously didn't have a gold card. She sighed. She just wanted to get him out of the club as quickly as possible. Would this be it? Elliot asked, as he pulled a card from his pocket. He handed it over, the gold shining brightly. This was the Global Club's Supreme Gold Card, the one Jack had given to him when he had purchased Starlight Restaurant. It carried an annual fee of $50,000 just to carry it in his wallet. Thank you. Wait, a gold card? She stammered, taking a second look at the card in her hand. Alexa was instantly dumbfounded. How on earth does he have a Supreme Gold Card? She asked herself. For a moment, she felt as though she had been slapped in the face. Then she slowly handed the card back to Elliot. So am I a member or not? Elliot asked, waving the golden card in his hand and looking at the server expectantly. Yes, Alexa replied. Regaining her composure, she nodded her head and said, As a gold card member, of course, you may come in. Feeling extremely uncomfortable, she could only manage a twisted smile, which made her pretty face look surprisingly ugly. Appearances can be deceiving, Elliot said as he put his card away. Yes, sir, Alexa responded through gritted teeth and lowered her head in embarrassment, her cheeks a mottled red. Just then, Jack walked into the hall and waved at Elliot with a big smile. Elliot, I'm glad you're here. Mr. Johnson, he started when Jack interrupted him. Oh, don't call me Mr. Johnson. I told you before, Jack is fine, Jack said, stopping next to Elliot. Okay, Jack, Elliot replied, taking a mental note to call the man by his first name. He'd always felt good about Jack, who never failed to welcome him warmly. Elliot, tonight we relax, Jack said. Then, extending his hand, he gestured toward a door behind them and said, "Let's take a private VIP room." "Sounds great, Jack. It's my treat tonight, okay?" Elliot said, and reached out his hand to push open one of the gold-colored doors to the VIP lounge. Much to his annoyance, Alexa reappeared and blocked his way. "Sir, you are a Gold Card member. Unfortunately, you aren't allowed access to this lounge," she informed him. "If it's a question of money, I've got it covered," Elliot said impatiently. He couldn't help but feel that the service at this club was appallingly bad. "It's not a matter of money, it's just that your card isn't eligible for this area," Alexa explained. She looked at him as though he were a petulant child, and she still couldn't understand how he had ever become a member of the club. "Well, well, if it isn't Jack Johnson," a voice said. As Alexa was explaining the situation to Elliot, a middle-aged man in a shiny blue suit and black leather shoes walked over with a slender woman on his arm. The man glanced at Jack, and then his gaze landed on Elliot. He said sarcastically, "I guess Jack must be pretty lonely. He's scraping the bottom of the barrel with this one." "Carlton, this is my friend Elliot," Jack said, and glared at the man with a grim expression. The man's name was Carlton Harris, and the two of them shared a long history of bad blood between them. They were intense competitors, and the entire Hillsdale business community knew them to be bitter rivals. "Oh, Jack, you've always had the worst taste. Your level of companionship couldn't have gotten lower," Carlton said, unable to hold back a laugh. The girl standing beside him began to giggle as well. "I'm afraid we were just leaving." "Goodbye, Carlton," Jack said, stifling his anger as he turned away from the golden doors. "Stop!" Carlton's voice rang out as he straightened his body and blocked their way. "Did I hear that your poor excuse for a friend wants to enter the VIP lounge?" "That's none of your business," Jack replied stiffly, as the fire in his eyes began to build. Carlton paid no attention. He glanced at Elliot with pure contempt and said snidely, "Looking like that, are you sure that you still want to go in?" He seemed to feel that the more he abused Elliot, the angrier Jack would get. "Why not?" Elliot replied, pissed off that this guy was being so rude to Jack. Always protective of his friends, he wanted nothing more than to teach Carlton a lesson. "The poor little shit wants to be a VIP, does he? Go and take a look at yourself in the mirror, boy, and then answer me," Carlton remarked sarcastically, continuing to roll out insults. Then he turned his head and said to Alexa, who had been standing there the whole time, "Will you kindly tell this kid who can and can't enter the lounge?" "Only members with diamond cards are allowed in," Alexa replied, flashing a withering look at Elliot. "Exactly, a diamond card," Carlton confirmed. He reached into his pocket and took out a club diamond card. Puffing up with pride, he boasted, "This diamond card is a symbol of status and identity. It's far superior to a gold card." He then smiled broadly and waved the diamond card back and forth in the air. "So, my poor boy, where's your diamond card? Got one of these babies?" he asked. "Nope," Elliot replied, unmoved by Carlton and his baiting. He wasn't biting. "Without a diamond card, how do you expect to enter the lounge then?" the man asked. "I may not have a diamond card, but I can still go in," Elliot said calmly, biding his time. Carlton wasn't the only one baiting here. "Ah!" Carlton exploded and spat on the ground. Then, certain that Elliot couldn't have a diamond card, he shouted out jeeringly, "If you can get through these golden doors today, I'll eat all the trash here." Episode 35. Secret Identity. "I think we all heard that," Elliot said, pursing his lips, a sly smile emerging. He then took out the black card from his pocket and asked the server, Alexa, "Am I allowed to enter now?" The card had been given to him by his assistant, Michelle. She claimed it had belonged to his grandfather. It was presumably more valuable than the club's gold and diamond cards combined. Carlton grinned when he saw it and couldn't resist taunting him more. "You aren't seriously trying to use your hotel room card here, are you?" His girlfriend, who was standing behind him, burst out laughing. Even the servers who were near enough to hear couldn't help but snicker. It's true that, at first glance, the plain black card didn't look very impressive. It really did look like a basic plastic room card from a normal hotel. Even Alexa was laughing. But when she saw the card more clearly, her face suddenly dropped, and her smile disappeared. Her eyes widened as she stared at the card. It was as if she were looking at something unreal, freakish even. Her expression became exaggerated in its disbelief. Only now did it dawn on her that the card in Elliot's hand was not an ordinary hotel room card, but the legendary Global Club Black Card. It was the club's highest level membership card, and there were only 3 of them in existence. But never in her wildest dreams had she imagined that she would one day actually see one of these cards in person, and that it would be in the hands of this seemingly ordinary-looking guy. The black card was not only a symbol of elite status and identity, but also of supreme power. Anyone with a black card had the power to control Global International and its entities at any given time. After staring at the black card blankly for a minute, Alexa slowly raised her head. She looked at Elliot and said with a trembling voice, "I really didn't think that." Fully aware of his black card benefits, her eyes showed her unease when she looked at him now. She was terrified of what he might do to her after the way she had treated him. For nearly a year she had worked at the Global International Club, and of course, she had learned all about the various membership card levels, but she had only ever seen the holder of a black card in photos before. Elliot had a black card, and that meant his identity and status were unparalleled. It was scary just thinking about it. Since he had walked through the doors of the club, she had done nothing but ridicule Elliot. Alexa had no doubt that she was about to suffer some severe consequences. "So am I allowed to enter the lounge now?" Elliot repeated, holding up the black card in his hand, waiting expectantly for a positive response. "If you could please wait just a moment," she said quietly. Alexa didn't have the authority to receive someone of such stature. She quickly took out her cell phone and made a call to her department head. Not long after the call ended, Global International Club's CEO came out with an entourage of about 10 senior staff members and a group of bodyguards. Jack and Carlton watched them approach. They knew nothing about the club's black card and were clueless to its significance. But when they saw the president of the club appear in the hall with his staff, they began to realize that there was something more serious going on there than they had previously thought. Everyone knew that the club's mysterious head was a big shot, owning several large corporations and no stranger to wealth. He was a very powerful influence in Hillsdale. Considering he rarely made public appearances, it became clear that this was a special occasion indeed. The atmosphere in the hall was extremely tense. All of the regular staff retreated silently, nervously ducking away, while sneaking furtive backward glances toward the unusual scene that was unfolding. Under the avid gaze of the crowd, Global International Club's CEO Robert Allen walked over with his group of staff members in tow. Robert's face had strong features, notable for its imposing nose and defined jawline. He always looked extremely stern, even when he wasn't angry, and he possessed a domineering aura. However, when he saw the black card in Elliot's hand, his usually expressionless face changed from imposing to deferential. He quickly approached Elliot and offered his hand. "On behalf of the Global International Club, I welcome you." His words and body language instantly surprised everyone. Carlton was so shocked that his jaw simply hung wide open. He never would have expected Robert Allen himself to even speak to someone like Elliot, and here he was shaking his hand. His own efforts to speak with Robert in the past had failed miserably, and he had found himself repeatedly ignored. This, he saw, was something else entirely. Not only was Carlton shocked and surprised, but Jack was completely floored. "Who are you?" Elliot asked politely, although it was pretty obvious. "I am Robert Allen, CEO of the club," the man replied respectfully, taking care to treat his black card member with the professionalism that was expected. Although he didn't know the young man in front of him, he did recognize the card he was holding, and in reality, that was all he really needed to know. The black card had belonged to the Branders family for generations, and was one of only 3 in the world. It had been given to the family by Hiram Branders, Elliot's great-grandfather, as a reminder of their powerful position as global business leaders. Hiram had been highly respected by his peers, and his name was still very well known in elite international circles. Anyone who had the black card represented the Branders family name itself, and those around them understood the weight that carried. "So, you're the head of the Global International Club," Elliot said, nodding. He hadn't expected to be treated like this simply because he had the black card in his possession. He was beginning to get a sense of the card's importance. "My name is Elliot Branders." He introduced himself in a friendly tone. Extending his right arm, he shook hands with Robert. "Hello, Mr. Branders," Robert replied, and signaled to his executive staff to shake Elliot's hand as well. "It's nice to meet you," Elliot said. Then, with a grin, he waved his hand in the air and asked, "So am I finally allowed to enter the lounge now, or what?" "Of course, Mr. Branders," Robert answered, and personally opened the door by pressing his finger on the electronic ID pad. "Wait!" Carlton called out. He had snapped out of his trance and quickly ran over to stop them from entering. "Mr. Allen, excuse me, but according to club rules, only customers with diamond cards are permitted to enter the VIP lounge." "Mr. Branders doesn't have a diamond card. He has a black card," Robert replied bluntly, and pointed to the black card in Elliot's hand. "Is a black card comparable to a diamond card?" Carlton asked. He had never heard of black cards before, so he didn't know the difference. "There is no card better than a black card," the CEO told him. "Not even a diamond card?" Carlton wondered. "How is it possible that I've never heard of this black card before?" After a slight pause, he had to ask, "Please, Mr. Allen, just one more question. I've got to know. Who is he?" "I don't know who he is," Robert said to him. Then he leaned his head over and whispered, "But one thing is certain. He's someone we can't afford to offend." When Carlton heard Robert's words, his face went numb. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead as he looked at Elliot uneasily. Robert Allen was an extremely well-known and important figure in Hillsdale, and even he couldn't afford to offend Elliot? Carlton wondered. He had no idea just how powerful Elliot was, and he sure as hell didn't know who he was. However, there was one thing that he was sure of. He needed to watch his step around Elliot. He obviously wasn't someone to mess around with. Carlton knew that now. He was already starting to feel worried about the way he had insulted him earlier, and could only hope that it would be forgotten. Even the girl who had been standing behind him was now studying the club's black card member with a serious expression on her face. She had also realized something that evening. That insignificant nobody she had looked down on before was someone even Carlton couldn't afford to offend.